The vast chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with the soft whispers of 200 different species. Ambassador Li Zhang fought back a yawn as she sat through what felt like the millionth discussion about standardizing trade routes between the Centauri and Orion sectors. The anti-grav seats, designed to accommodate everything from methane-breathing floating spheres to crystalline beings, somehow managed to be uncomfortable for every single species that sat in them. She glanced around the massive amphitheater, taking in the familiar sight of the council chambers. Holographic displays flickered with translations in countless languages, while environmental fields shimmered around delegates who needed special atmospheres to breathe. After 3 years as Earth's representative, Li had learned to read the room's mood like a weather forecast. Today's atmosphere felt odd, tense. Several delegates kept shooting strange looks toward the human section. Next on our agenda, announced High Counselor Votrak, their bioluminescent tentacles pulsing with formal patterns. The Voltaxian Confederation wishes to raise concerns about humanity's continued expansion and military development. Li sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. This wasn't on the day's scheduled agenda. The Voltaxian representative, Ambassador Catil, floated toward the central platform. Like all Voltaxians, Till resembled an elegant cloud of purple gas contained within a transparent environmental suit. Their voice came through the translation system with the typical Voltaxian tone of smug superiority. Esteemed colleagues, Till began, their gas form swirling with patterns of concern. We can no longer ignore the disturbing behavior of our human associates. Our cultural analysis team has completed a thorough study of human society, and our findings are deeply troubling. The chamber's background hum quieted as hundreds of alien delegates leaned forward in interest. Li felt her stomach tighten. She dealt with plenty of criticism of humanity before, but something about Catil's tone set off warning bells in her head. A massive hologram appeared above the chamber, showing scenes from Earth. Military parades, action movies, war memorials, defense installations. Humanity, Kill continued, is pathologically obsessed with war. Their entertainment glorifies violence. Their children play with toy weapons. They spend astronomical sums on military preparation despite no immediate threats. They maintain enough weapons to destroy their own planet several times over. More images flashed by. Kids playing laser tag. History documentaries about past wars. Civilian defense drills. The new Luma defense platform under construction. But most disturbing of all, Catil's voice grew even more condescending, is their constant, irrational fear of conflict. They see threats where none exist. They prepare for wars that will never come. They treat peace as a temporary state rather than the natural order of civilized species. Li's hands clenched into fists under her desk. She watched as other delegates nodded along, their various appendages and sensory organs showing signs of agreement. The Arxer delegation's spines were vibrating with concern. The Xinthi's electromagnetic auras pulsed with patterns of distress. Look at their history, Kill continued. Even after achieving spaceflight and joining the galactic community, they continue to build weapons, fortify their colonies, and maintain a military force far larger than needed for basic security. They claim to want peace while preparing for war at every moment. A hologram showed Earth's orbital defense grid, the Mars Military Academy, the new fleet of heavily armed diplomatic escorts that accompanied human merchant ships. And now they seek to expand their influence, to spread their paranoid worldview to other species. They offer military protection to younger races, building dependencies and promoting their war-obsessed culture across the galaxy. Li felt her face growing hot with anger. The Voltaxian was clever, she had to admit. They weren't exactly wrong about any specific fact, but the way they presented it twisted everything into something sinister. And the other delegates were eating it up. We must act now. Catil's gas form swirled with urgent patterns. I move that humanity's council status be reduced to provisional membership until they demonstrate a more civilized approach to galactic society. Their current behavior poses a cultural threat to the stable peace we have maintained for millennia. The chamber erupted in discussion. Lee watched in disbelief as species after species signaled agreement. The Pelkin ambassador, usually one of humanity's strongest allies, wouldn't even meet her eyes. The Quantum Collective's representative was already calculating probability models for human cultural contamination. Does Earth's representative wish to respond? High Counselor Votrak asked, their tentacles showing patterns that suggested they expected a diplomatic withdrawal or apology. Lee stood slowly, her mind racing. 3 years of diplomatic training screamed at her to play it safe, to be conciliatory, to promise that humanity would review its policies. But as she looked around at the faces and sensory organs of the gathered species, she saw something that made her blood boil. Pity. They thought humans were primitive, paranoid children who needed to be taught better by their civilized elders. She walked to the central platform, passing Catil, who emanated smug satisfaction. The Voltaxian clearly expected another example of human diplomatic submission to the Council's wisdom. As Lee took her position, she thought about her grandfather who survived the Jakarta resource riots, about her mother who helped rebuild Brisbane after the rising seas crisis, about her own experiences during the first contact panic of 2047. The council chamber waited for her response, expecting apologies and promises to change. Instead, Li Zhang, representative of humanity, took a deep breath and prepared to give the Galactic Council the wake-up call of their millennium. She wasn't going to just defend humanity. She was going to make them understand exactly why humans were the way they were, and why that made them not weaker, but stronger than any species in this chamber. Esteemed colleagues, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Before I address Ambassador Catil's concerns, I'd like to tell you a story. A story about what happens to species who aren't paranoid enough, who don't prepare for the worst, who assume peace is the natural order rather than something that must be constantly maintained. The chamber grew silent as Lee's opening words hinted at something different than the expected diplomatic dance. She could see confusion in the various alien expressions and postures. Good. She had their attention. Now she just had to make them understand why humanity's supposed weakness was actually their greatest strength, and why the Council's complacency was more dangerous than any human military buildup could ever be. As Ambassador Lee stood at the podium, memories flooded her mind. She remembered sitting in her grandmother's kitchen as a child, watching the old woman's hands shake as she poured tea and spoke of the past. Never forget, her grandmother would say, what happens when we forget our history? The kitchen would grow quiet then, filled only with the soft hum of the atmospheric purifiers, a constant reminder of what humanity had nearly lost. Her grandmother would tell stories of the resource wars, of watching mighty cities crumble not from weapons, but from simple human need, of how close they'd come to destroying everything. These memories washed over Lee as she faced the council, their alien faces showing mixtures of contempt and pity. They thought they understood war because they'd studied it in their histories, but they'd never really faced it, never felt it in their bones. You call us paranoid. Lee began, her voice cutting through the chamber's whispers. You mock our preparations, our defenses, our readiness. But let me ask you something. How many of your species have stared into the abyss of their own extinction? Not from natural disasters or cosmic events, but from their own actions. The chamber grew still. Lee noticed several delegates shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The Voltaxian Confederation speaks of our war games as if they're something primitive. But where were your mighty peacekeeping forces when the Proxima colony faced pirate raids last year? Oh, that's right. Debating proper response protocols while human ships rushed to defend them. She pulled up her own holographic display, showing scenes that contrasted sharply with Till's earlier presentation. Human rescue teams pulling survivors from earthquake rubble on a dozen worlds. Earth's emergency response fleets delivering aid to flood-ravaged colonies. Military vessels escorting refugee ships to safety. Lee stood slowly, her mind racing. 3 years of diplomatic training screamed at her to play it safe, to be conciliatory, to promise that humanity would review its policies. But as she looked around at the faces and sensory organs of the gathered species, she saw something that made her blood boil: pity. They thought humans were primitive, paranoid children who needed to be taught better by their civilized elders. She walked to the central platform, passing Catil, who emanated smug satisfaction. The Voltaxian clearly expected another example of human diplomatic submission to the Council's wisdom. As Lee took her position, she thought about her grandfather who survived the Jakarta resource riots, about her mother who helped rebuild Brisbane after the rising seas crisis, about her own experiences during the first contact panic of 2047. The council chamber waited for her response, expecting apologies and promises to change. Instead, Li Zhang, representative of humanity, took a deep breath and prepared to give the Galactic Council the wake-up call of their millennium. She wasn't going to just defend humanity. She was going to make them understand exactly why humans were the way they were, and why that made them not weaker, but stronger than any species in this chamber. Esteemed colleagues, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Before I address Ambassador Catil's concerns, I'd like to tell you a story. A story about what happens to species who aren't paranoid enough, who don't prepare for the worst, who assume peace is the natural order rather than something that must be constantly maintained. The chamber grew silent as Lee's opening words hinted at something different than the expected diplomatic dance. She could see confusion in the various alien expressions and postures. Good. She had their attention. Now she just had to make them understand why humanity's supposed weakness was actually their greatest strength, and why the Council's complacency was more dangerous than any human military buildup could ever be. As Ambassador Lee stood at the podium, memories flooded her mind. She remembered sitting in her grandmother's kitchen as a child, watching the old woman's hands shake as she poured tea and spoke of the past. Never forget, her grandmother would say. What happens when we forget our history? The kitchen would grow quiet then, filled only with the soft hum of the atmospheric purifiers, a constant reminder of what humanity had nearly lost. Her grandmother would tell stories of the resource wars, of watching mighty cities crumble not from weapons, but from simple human need, of how close they'd come to destroying everything. These memories washed over Lee as she faced the council, their alien faces showing mixtures of contempt and pity. They thought they understood war because they'd studied it in their histories, but they'd never really faced it, never felt it in their bones. You call us paranoid, Lee began, her voice cutting through the chamber's whispers. You mock our preparations, our defenses, our readiness. But let me ask you something. How many of your species have stared into the abyss of their own extinction? Not from natural disasters or cosmic events, but from their own actions. The chamber grew still. Lee noticed several delegates shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The Voltaxian Confederation speaks of our war games as if they're something primitive. But where were your mighty peacekeeping forces when the Proxima colony faced pirate raids last year? Oh, that's right. Debating proper response protocols while human ships rushed to defend them. She pulled up her own holographic display, showing scenes that contrasted sharply with Catil's earlier presentation. Human rescue teams pulling survivors from earthquake rubble on a dozen worlds. Earth's emergency response fleets delivering aid to flood-ravaged colonies. Military vessels escorting refugee ships to safety. You see our defensive preparations and call them paranoid. We call them necessary. You look at our military spending and see warmongering. We see the price of ensuring no one ever has to live through what we've survived. Lee's voice grew quieter, but somehow it carried even more weight. My grandmother used to say that peace isn't a natural state. It's a garden that needs constant tending. You think you've created peace by simply avoiding conflict. We know better. We've learned that peace must be built, protected, and sometimes fought for. The High Counselor's tentacles showed patterns of disturbance, but Lee wasn't finished. She brought up new images. The memorial in old Shanghai, its walls listing millions of names. The rebuilt towers of New Delhi rising from reclaimed land. the first human-alien joint defense exercise that had saved thousands during the Betelgeuse solar flare. You call us war-fearing, as if it's an insult. But our fear, our deep, visceral understanding of what war truly costs, that's exactly what makes us different. We don't fear war because we love it. We fear it because we respect its power to destroy everything we hold dear. Lee paused, letting her words sink in. She could see the confusion in the alien delegates' postures and expressions. They'd expected apologies and submission. Instead, they were getting a history lesson they never knew they needed. And now, she continued, her voice growing stronger, let me show you exactly why our so-called paranoia has made us better guardians of peace than any species in this chamber. Ambassador Lee brought up a new hologram, this one showing Earth's night side. Countless lights sparkled across the continents, a testament to humanity's resilience. But scattered among those lights were dark patches, the exclusion zones, areas still recovering from past conflicts. Look carefully, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. Those dark spaces aren't natural features. They're scars, reminders. Each one tells a story of what happens when we aren't prepared, when we assume peace will last forever. The hologram zoomed in on one such zone, showing the slow work of recovery teams. Their protective suits gleamed in the sun as they cleaned contaminated soil, planted new life in dead earth. This is what we carry with us into space. Not a love of war, but the hard-earned knowledge of its cost. A Xynthi delegate's electromagnetic field flickered with what their species used for laughter. Yet you still maintain massive military forces, they said. If you truly understood war's cost, surely you would embrace total disarmament like civilized species. Lee's expression hardened. Let me tell you about civilized responses to threats. She brought up footage from the Proxima colony attack. When pirates struck this settlement, the Council's response team spent 3 days drafting a formal condemnation. It took human ships just 6 hours to arrive and drive the attackers away. The chamber stirred uncomfortably. Several delegates looked away from the images of human vessels engaging the pirate fleet, protecting civilian transport ships. You call it paranoia. We call it responsibility. Lee's voice grew passionate but remained controlled. Every defense platform we build, every ship we arm, every drill we run, they all serve one purpose: to ensure that no one, human or alien, has to learn about war the way we did. She switched the display to show the Mars Military Academy, but instead of focusing on weapons training, the images showed cadets learning emergency response, practicing rescue operations, studying xenobiology for medical aid. Our preparations aren't just about fighting. They're about being ready for everything that can go wrong. When the Arcturus solar flares hit 3 colonies last year, who was first to respond? When the Rigel plague threatened to spread across 2 sectors, who had ships ready to deliver medical supplies? The High Counselor's tentacles showed patterns of reluctant acknowledgement. They remembered those incidents and how quickly human forces had acted. You see weapons, Lee continued. We see tools. You see paranoia. We see preparation. You look at our history and see only the conflicts. We look at our history and see the lessons that kept us alive. She paused, letting her words sink in. The chamber was silent now, the earlier mockery replaced by something closer to thoughtful consideration. Even Kitil's gaseous form had stopped its smug swirling. And yes, we train our children to understand conflict, not because we want them to fight, but because we want them to understand why we must work so hard for peace. We want them to know why every defense platform matters, why every emergency drill counts, why we can never take peace for granted. A hologram shifted one final time, showing human and alien crews working together during joint exercises. This is what you're really afraid of, isn't it? Not that we'll start a war, but that other species might learn from us, might realize that true peace comes from strength and readiness, not from pretending conflict doesn't exist. Ambassador Lee straightened her back, ready to deliver the next part of her response. She could see that her words had struck home with some delegates. Now it was time to show them exactly what humanity's paranoid preparation had achieved. Lee tapped her datapad, bringing up a new series of holograms. This time, they showed something unexpected: peace treaties, hundreds of them, signed not just between human nations, but between alien species who had sought human mediation. Interesting fact, she said, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone. Did you know that human diplomats have helped prevent 37 potential conflicts between council species in the last 5 years alone? Of course you didn't, because we prevented them before they became official council matters. The chamber buzzed with surprise. Several delegates began rapidly checking their own data feeds. You see, that's the thing about understanding conflict. You get really good at stopping it before it starts. Lee highlighted specific treaties, showing the careful diplomatic work that had gone into each one. When the Centauri mining dispute threatened to turn violent, who stepped in? Human negotiators. Why? Because we recognized the warning signs. We'd seen them before in our own history. She switched the display to show the Orion Peace Accords, where human mediators had helped 2 species avoid a resource war. Our paranoid nature, as you call it, makes us excellent at spotting potential flashpoints. Our obsession with preventing conflict drives us to find solutions others might miss. A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber as delegates recognized their own species in the diplomatic records. The Voltaxian representative's gaseous form churned with agitation. But perhaps most telling, Lee continued, bringing up new data, is what happened when we started sharing our defensive technologies with younger species. Ambassador Kill called it spreading paranoia. Let's look at the actual results. The statistics were clear. Piracy down 60% in protected sectors. Natural disaster response times improved by 73%. Civilian casualty rates in accidents and emergencies dropped by nearly 80%. You call it warmongering when we build defenses, but ask the Proxima colonists if they feel threatened by our patrol ships. Ask the Rigel survivors if they resent our emergency response protocols. Ask any of the dozen species who've benefited from our medical technology, originally developed for battlefield trauma, if they wish we were less paranoid about being prepared. Lee's voice grew softer, but her words carried even more weight. We don't just prepare for war. We prepare for everything. Because that's what you do when you've learned the hard way that peace isn't just the absence of conflict. It's the presence of readiness. She highlighted a final set of images: joint human-alien rescue operations, diplomatic conferences, scientific collaborations. Every defense platform we build doubles as a research station. Every military ship carries more medical supplies than weapons. Every soldier trains as a rescue worker first. The chamber had grown thoughtfully quiet. Even the most skeptical delegates were now paying close attention to the evidence before them. You've called us paranoid because we never forget the cost of being unprepared. But that same paranoia has saved more lives, prevented more conflicts, and protected more peace than all your noble intentions combined. Ambassador Lee paused, letting the weight of her words settle. She could see the shift in the room, from condescension to consideration, from pity to something approaching respect. But she wasn't finished. Now it was time to show them something even more important: how humanity's approach to peace through preparedness had actually created something entirely new in galactic history. Ambassador Lee's next hologram made several delegates flinch. It showed the recent Betelgeuse disaster, a massive solar storm that had threatened 3 populated systems. The Council's response had been to form a committee to study evacuation protocols. While this council debated proper procedures, Lee said, her voice tight with controlled emotion, human ships were already moving into position. Our paranoid preparation meant we had vessels equipped to handle stellar radiation. Our excessive military spending had given us ships with shields strong enough to protect evacuation transports. The images shifted to show human vessels creating a protective screen around civilian ships, their enhanced shields glowing as they absorbed the deadly radiation. 23,000 lives saved. Because we were ready. Because we planned for the worst while hoping for the best. A Pelkin delegate raised their crystalline form. But surely such extensive preparation wastes resources that could be better spent on cultural advancement. Lee actually smiled at this. Funny you should mention that. She brought up new data streams. Look at technological advancement rates among species who've partnered with human defense initiatives. The numbers were striking. Species who worked with humans showed massive jumps in medical technology, energy efficiency, and environmental protection. When you prepare for the worst, you have to get creative. Every problem we solved for defense had civilian applications. Emergency power systems became clean energy solutions. Military communication networks evolved into public broadcasting systems. Battlefield medicine revolutionized civilian healthcare. She zoomed in on specific examples. A radiation shield designed for warships now protected cleanup crews in disaster zones. Water purification systems from military bases provided clean water to drought-stricken colonies. Emergency response protocols developed for combat scenarios saved lives during natural disasters. But here's what really bothers you, isn't it? Lee's voice took on an edge of challenge. We've proven that our way works better. The species who work with us thrive. The colonies we protect prosper. The regions where we patrol see less conflict, not more. The chamber stirred uncomfortably. She was right, and they knew it. You call us primitive because we remember our wars. But that memory is exactly what drives us to find better solutions. You call us paranoid because we prepare for threats. But that preparation has saved more lives than your comfortable complacency ever has. Lee brought up one final set of statistics: the expansion rates of various species into space. Those under human protection showed consistently higher success rates, lower casualty figures, and better emergency response times. Look at your own records, she continued. Count how many times human ships responded to emergencies while the Council was still drafting response protocols. Check how many conflicts were prevented because our presence discouraged aggression. See how many lives were saved because we were paranoid enough to be prepared. The High Counselor's tentacles showed patterns of deep thought. Even Ketil's gaseous form had stopped its angry swirling, settling into what might have been thoughtful consideration. You've called us war-fearing, Lee said, her voice growing stronger. But what you're really seeing is something you don't understand. The determination of a species that knows exactly what it's protecting, because we know exactly what we could lose. She could see it in their postures, their expressions, their energy patterns. The Council was beginning to understand. But Lee wasn't finished. She had one more point to make, one that would challenge everything these ancient species thought they knew about peace. The holographic display shifted again, this time showing something unexpected: children playing. But not just human children. The footage showed young ones from a dozen different species, training together in emergency response scenarios, learning to work as teams, discovering how to turn fear into preparation. This, Lee said softly, is what you've completely missed about us. The images showed the young ones working together to solve problems, supporting each other through challenges, learning to face difficulties as a united front. You looked at our military academies and saw only warriors in training. You never noticed that we spend more time teaching cooperation than combat. You saw our defense drills and missed the fact that we're teaching the next generation how to protect all life, not just human life. The chamber watched as the footage showed training exercises transforming into real-world applications. Young graduates from these programs now served on mixed-species emergency response teams, their human training helping them save lives across the galaxy. Our war culture, as you call it, has created something unique in galactic history: the first truly integrated emergency response network. While you were writing guidelines for cooperation, we were actually doing it. Lee highlighted specific incidents: a human-trained Orcs team rescuing survivors from a space station accident, a joint human Xynthi crew preventing a colonial reactor meltdown, a mixed-species medical team using human battlefield techniques to contain a viral outbreak, Every culture fears something, Lee continued. Some fear change. Some fear the unknown. We humans, we fear failing those who need us, and that fear has driven us to create systems that benefit everyone. The display showed the massive monitoring network humanity had built, not for war, but for protection. Early warning systems for natural disasters, emergency response protocols that crossed species boundaries, training programs that taught different species how to work together effectively. You call it paranoia when we install defense platforms around our colonies, but those same platforms have detected and warned of 17 major solar storms, 3 rogue comets, and 1 pending supernova. Their sensors have saved millions of lives, human and alien alike. She brought up more recent footage, the platforms being used to coordinate rescue operations, to guide ships through dangerous space, to maintain communication during crisis. Our military ships, they carry more medical supplies than weapons. Our defense budget, most of it goes to research and development that benefits everyone. Our training programs, they're open to any species willing to learn. The council chamber had grown very quiet. The earlier mockery was completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like embarrassment in some delegates' postures. You saw our preparations and assumed we were expecting war. The truth is, we're expecting anything. Natural disasters, accidents, plagues, or yes, even conflict. Because that's what real peace looks like. Not pretending bad things can't happen, but being ready to face them together when they do. Lee's voice grew passionate, but remained steady. Every time you've called us paranoid, we've turned that paranoia into protection. Every time you've mocked our preparations, those same preparations have saved lives. Every time you've dismissed us as primitive, we've shown you what real civilization looks like. Species working together, protecting each other, turning fear into readiness. The High Counselor's tentacles showed patterns of deep realization. Even Kittil's gaseous form had shifted to a hue that indicated serious contemplation. But Ambassador Lee wasn't finished. She had one final point to make, one that would force the Council to completely reevaluate their understanding of both humanity and peace itself. Ambassador Lee took a deep breath, looking around the council chamber one last time. The mood had shifted dramatically from the beginning of her speech. Where there had been contempt, she now saw understanding beginning to dawn in the aliens' expressions and postures. "Let me tell you about real peace," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "Peace isn't just the absence of conflict. It's not some magical state that happens when you close your eyes to danger. Real peace is something you build, something you maintain, something you work for every single day." The holographic display showed a time-lapse of Earth's history, not focused on wars this time, but on recovery, rebuilding, and growth. Cities rising from ashes, gardens blooming in former wastelands, people of different cultures learning to work together. You think we fear war. You're right. We fear it like a farmer fears drought, like an engineer fears structural failure, like a doctor fears disease. And just like them, we use that fear to drive us to find solutions, to be ready, to protect what matters. She brought up new images, the latest graduation ceremony from the Interspecies Defense Academy. Young beings from 30 different species training together, learning from each other, becoming something greater than any single species could be alone. "Look at them," Lee said softly. "Really look. They're not learning how to fight wars. They're learning how to prevent them. They're not training to destroy. They're training to protect. This is humanity's real gift to the galaxy. We've turned our fear into a force for unity." The chamber was absolutely silent now. Even the usual background hum of environmental systems seemed muted. "You called us primitive because we remember our wars. But those memories taught us something none of you have learned, that real strength isn't in pretending you're above conflict. Real strength is in being ready to stand together against whatever challenges come." Lee's voice grew stronger, filled with quiet conviction. "You want to know what really makes humans different? It's not that we fear war more than you do. It's that we love peace enough to work for it, to fight for it, to build it, piece by piece, day by day, world by world. The display showed final images, human and alien crews working side by side in emergencies, mixed species colonies thriving under shared protection, children from different worlds playing together in safety because of the defenses their parents built together. So yes, call us war-fearing if you want. But remember this, our fear has created more peace than your complacency ever has. Our paranoia has saved more lives than your noble intentions. Our preparation has built bridges between species that your philosophy never could. Ambassador Lee straightened to her full height, her voice carrying the weight of all human history as she delivered her final words. We don't just dream of peace, we work for it. We don't just hope for safety, we build it. And we don't just pray for unity, we make it happen. That's not paranoia. That's not primitive thinking. That's humanity's gift to the stars, and we will never apologize for it. The chamber erupted in a sound that had never been heard before in the Galactic Council. Applause. It started with the younger species, those who had benefited directly from human protection. Then spread to the neutral delegates. Even some of the earlier critics joined in. The High Counselor's tentacles glowed with patterns of deep respect. Only Keitil remained still, their gaseous form now showing colors that in their species indicated something between embarrassment and revelation. Their motion to reduce Earth's status was quietly withdrawn before the session ended. As Ambassador Lee left the podium, she smiled slightly. They had finally understood. Humanity wasn't the galaxy's warrior race. We were its guardians. And that made all the difference.